Um, I was born November 1st, 1909, the third youngest of 12. On a farm, always on a farm. And the last farm we were on was, and we had fun playing in it, winter and summer. And cousins would come and play with us until I got 10 years old and I had to get to work. I went to the grade school in Long Branch. I had to walk, that was quite a ways to walk, until third or fourth grade, and then you had to go to Tennyson to the Catholic school in order to make your first communion. You had to go to a Catholic school. And then we boarded there in the wintertime, and I walked in the summer. Up over the hill, through the pastures for a shortcut. It was quite a walk, but we didn't think that was anything in those days. And then when, Father Sheffer started a Catholic high school in Tennyson about 1925. So I started right there. That was the thing to do. And one year, my sister Vernetta was 4 years younger than me, and some days she couldn't walk all that way. So we used a horse and buggy, and I would drive the buggy. She was in the 7th and 8th grade, and I was in high school. We'd drive, and there was a shed near the parsonage there, and we'd unhook the horse and tie him there and give him some feed. And then we'd drive. It took longer to drive than if I'd have walked. But that was it. Then I finished high school. One year I stayed home, and I went back again, and I finished it in 3 years that way. And then Sister Hartens pushed me through, gave me extras, and in the winter months I boarded in there, I guess. And she'd give me extra classes and to do, study in the evening. And so I got through high school in 1927 or something like that. And then it was decided I could go to a college in Dubuque. Father Byer was our pastor then. And I went to Clark College for 1 year, and I stayed a couple of miles away from there and worked for my room and board. And I'd walk a ways, and then I'd get on a bus, and that would drop me off at the university. And then I'd have to get off and change to a streetcar. That's how I got to Clark College. It was a lot of walking, but I was well. And that was, the times were getting bad at that time. And the senior girl there, who was my, I don't know what you call it, a second sister or something like that. You had sisters in there to help you. And she was telling that she was a senior that spring, and she said, and she was taking the same thing as I was, a math course, and she said there was no sign of a job for her. And I thought, there's no need of me going on then anymore if there's aren't any jobs. So I quit and went back to I did some little weekly jobs in Dubuque. I worked for $5 a week sometimes. And then I would stay at Stella and George's sometime. They lived in Dubuque in between jobs or whatever, and weekends or something. Then went back to the farm, and I was needed there, that's for sure. My dad was old. He shouldn't have been farming anymore, but that was his life. And I worked at Walsh's store for a while until February of that year because that's when they take inventory and there's nothing doing. And I quit there then, or I was laid off. And then I decided to get married. And Harry was raised in that neighborhood too. And times are hard for him too. When he had a sore foot, he had what was that, heel? What was that called? Spur on his heel. And he had surgery a couple of times in Rochester, so he wasn't too fitted to go out farming. So he got a job in Tennyson Creamery as a bookkeeper, part-time. And then we got married in June of 1929. And he kept that job for a little bit, and then he started farming, mostly on his dad's farm down in the bottom of Lightfried Hill. His dad had a farm, which was where we had cows there, and they had a barn. That's about all. At one time, I would help milk. You'd have to look to see if you found a nice, quiet cow, and take a stool and a pail and go up and ask her if she's going to stand there quiet, and you'd milk that way. That wasn't very long, though, and then we quit that, and that was just, we had a few cows, milking cows. And we lived in Tennyson across from the creamery, so we'd go back and forth. And the house there was owned by his dad, Henry Abing, and so was the farm. Oh, that's enough of that. Then he started farming a little bit better, and we went out to a British there on a farm, and we were working with Hilda and Oscar. They were there already, and we went working as co-workers there for 1 year. And and when we lived in Tennyson, our first girl was born, Patricia, and she was about 8 and a half, and she had eczema. All of a sudden, she got that, and it was so bad. We had to put mittens on her so she wouldn't scratch her face and so forth, and it was miserable for her. And there was nothing they could do. And then all of a sudden she got an infection in it. And we had Dr. from Platteville, Dr. Cunningham, come down. We had our own doctor, but we asked him to come down, and he said no, there was nothing. She had an infection. There was nothing those days to do for it. So she passed away in about a week. And that was rough. Then we stayed there another year until Vincent was born. And then when he was born in February, and then in March we moved out to this farm with Oscar and Hilda. And then we raised him there. And went back to Tennyson, and we lived on the Rook Farm, it was called. It was a real nice house, and big house. And Rosen was born right after we moved. Rosen was born there, and we stayed there long enough. A year or two later, till Mary was born there, and Mary was 9 months old when we moved down to the Treffley farm, way down. I call it the boondocks. Down towards Stickyville, you turn off the road, where Charlie Abing used to live, and Harriet was born down there. So each one was a different place, except Mary and Rosa were born in the same house. Right there. Okay. That reminds me, when we lived in Tennyson, renting from Henry Abing, he came over to get his payment. He had just lived 3 houses away, payment for the rent, and I went in the other room, and we had bought a radio, and I turned it on for myself, and then it was such a nice song, I turned it up a little louder so that Henry could hear it, because it was such a nice song. I thought he'd like it. And after he left, Harry said, "You shouldn't have done that. He doesn't like music, and you shouldn't have showed off that we bought a radio when we were so hard up." I got told that. I didn't know that. And When we moved down to that Crefty place, we hired Gertie Crefty, who was John. We rented from John Crefty in Lancaster, and Gertie was his daughter. And she came. We hired her to help us move, and we moved down there on a pretty snowy day, and their neighbors all helped move, except the cattle, the milk cows. So Harry went back that evening to milk the cows, and he came back in a sled of some kind. So it got to be supper time, and Gertie and I, we needed some water to drink, and we went over to that, I don't know what they called it, milk. Huh? It's something that in the wall where there was over on the hillside where the water came from the spring, and there was a tank in there, and there would be cool down milk in there. So we were able to get some water, and it was all muddy because it was getting surface water. So we went back to the house. What are we going to drink? And I was nursing Mary, and I thought, I got to do something. So we said, Harry had moved down some beer. We had made home brew at that time, and they put it in the cellar that day. And we didn't want to go around the outside way, and we didn't know what the cellar looked like, really. But there was a trap door in the pantry. And we said, oh, let's go down here and see if maybe we'll have to drink beer, which neither one of us wanted to. And we went, opened that trap door, and it looked dark down there, and we said, oh, my gosh, no. So we lit a lamp and went around the outside way and found some beer to drink until Harry came down later in the night with the milk that he had milked that day. Next day, they went and moved the cows down. So that was our fear of that water over there being muddy sometimes. Then we moved up to, I think we moved back to the Rook place again. I'm not for sure. I think we were there for a year or two. And then we bought the farm that Ed Minnie was living on. It was a mini farm, right as you go down the Lightfried Hill to the right. And there we decided to borrow some money and buy the farm. And then we had the REA was built in there, and we said it cost $300, I think, to hook up. And Harry didn't think he could afford it, but neighbor said, oh, yes, you got to pay so much a month anyway after that, but look at the difference, and you have the electricity. Of course, we lived there a while before we hooked up to that. And then that war was hard, and you had stamps for everything, sugar and everything, and I know we had then we decided to build a new kitchen and build a basement under, a good basement, which we needed. So Cletus Swap helped with the horses with a grader and haul the dirt, dug the dirt out, and I remember at the time, as they were doing that, it was in the fall when the what do you call them?
Cubs.
Playing out in California.
Cubs. I think it was a Cubs game.
Was it? Well, when it was some big ball game.
World Series.
World Series, yes, that's what it was. And they had me to listen on the radio once in a while to see, Cletus was watching that closely, see what the score was. And then David was born in that farm, and Carl, and Karen, and Alan. So I don't know how many years we lived there. I'll have to look that up. Add that sometime. Then David was in 1950. Yeah, that's right. He was almost 10 years old, and he was going to school. Vincent was taking the kids to school in the car in the morning. He was in high school, and Rosen and Mary, and then he took took David and Carl along to school, to grade school. And David went out at recess time in the afternoon. It was snowing, and some boy, it was a Pinnakin boy, had brought his car, his sled that noon. He went home for lunch and it was starting to snow, so he brought his sled to school. When they went out for recess, David saw that sled and he just jumped on it quick. He was that kind of a guy. And he was going to go down the bank, but instead it was so slick, he went into the highway on the hillside there where Arguses lived. And a neighbor came along, Rickard Tobin was just coming along, and he hit him. And he slid all down, and he got bruised on the chest. And they took him into the Argus house then and called the doctor. And then they called me, and Vincent was at a sale in Platteville at the time. And I got in touch with him some way, I don't remember, but...
Me and Harry.
Hmm?
Me and Dad.
Harry, yeah. And I went to up to Argus's there. He was unconscious, but breathing, and his chest, when they opened it up and saw his chest where he had been injured, and they saw his chest looked so bad because he had grafting done on his skin taken from his chest to put on his knee. He had a burn some years before that. So they thought it looked bad because, it wasn't an ordinary skin. But he was crushed. And so Harry got there a little while after he passed away from Platteville. That hit him. He had taken care of David all that 1 year when he had that burn. He had burn on his leg, and he took him to sometimes he took him every day to a Lancaster doctor, and he was at the worst part, and the leg was badly burned in an accident with the plane with the lantern in the barn. So it hurt. He was his pride and joy at the time. Got him healed, and then he had that happen. So then he decided to leave that place, because every time he drove up that road, he saw that spot. And can I stop this a minute? And during the time we were digging out that basement, my sister Evelyn, who was 2 years older than me, was very sick in a hospital in Minnesota. So Vernetta asked me if I'd go up with her on the train. Hilda had gone earlier, and she stayed a few days. And I had to leave my girls there, Rosalind and Mary, to take over the work there and feed the hired man and this and that. And we went up and we came back the next day though, and then Hilda came back with us. Evelyn was very sick, but she lived a little while after that, and she was brought to Tennyson to be buried. She had asthma problems all her life, and she was very frail. She had 4 children, and she had a good life at that. Then when I was pregnant with Karen, Harry was going to go over and cut brush in the wintertime in a way back pasture. He had to drive on the highway and go through another farm place, and he couldn't get the car started. About 11 o'clock or so, he couldn't get the car started out of the garage or something. So I went out and helped push and got it out, and he got started, and away he went. He was barely gone 15, 20 minutes, and I started having labor pains. There I was all alone. So I was lucky enough to call this man, the hired man on this other farm that he drove through to get to his pasture, and tell Harry to come home. So he came home and went up and got Clara, Mrs. Clarence Lyfried. Clara was our neighbor, to come be the midwife. So it worked out all right. And then we called the doctor from Lancaster, and he got there in time. Then Alan was next, wasn't he? No, Carl. Yeah. In those days, you took a birth naturally, no anesthetic or any help at all. And then you had to stay in bed 10 days afterwards. So I always had a hired girl at that time. And one time, the girl came into the bed. She was going to make bread. Of course, that's the only way you had bread is to make it. She came in and said, "How do we do this?" And I said, "Put so much flour in there." I just guessed at it. So she brought the flour into the bedside and stirred it in. And it turned out good, just the right amount of flour. And she made bread. She had never made bread before, but I think it was a Kirkenber's girl that worked for me that time, when Karen was born. All right. And we didn't have, you couldn't take aspirins or those things. You didn't know anything about them until about in 1950. Then we had baby aspirins. But in that place we did good. We built on and fixed things up, and we had a big garden. We built a front porch on and got the first tractor. I remember our 3 or 4 oldest ones sitting on the tractor and have a picture taken. That was something. We had to make most of our own clothes. We made even the winter overcoats and stuff for the kids. And you couldn't buy. They're starting to get them Jell-O and lettuce in the wintertime. That was a treat. Each Saturday, with the girls' help, I had a great big kettle of potatoes with the jackets, and I baked 2 batches of cookies and bread. And of course the girls were all helping, and they washed up all those dishes. That was for the week then. And we had a cook stove, which you had to fire up just right to get the oven at a temperature to bake. We learned how to carry the wood in. Then in this addition to our kitchen, we built in an outside wood box, and you could help yourself from the inside then. And farm prices were good, so that's how we added some good things to our life. And I guess I did say we got a refrigerator, didn't I? How'd you get it? Well, your life helped us. I don't want to say that. Right now. And the reason we got a refrigerator, our neighbor knew how to get one on the black market. It was cheap. You could tell, but it was wonderful. Had it on the back porch, and that was a treat. And we had the money, but you couldn't find it in those days. We weren't supposed to buy it. Our neighbors, we took turns with our neighbors in life reads. They had 3 or 4 children the same age as ours, and the fathers would take them to school in the morning and get them in the evening. So that helped a lot. It wasn't very far, but it sure helped. And then at that time, we had 5 of them in school. Vincent, Rosen, Mary, David, and Carl.
Harry.
Oh, Harriet's in there. Okay. And Harry decided, and Harriet. Harry decided that 5 in school was enough at one time, so he thought Rosen ought to quit, and Vincent was a senior, and she should go out and get a job. So she got a job working in Dubuque housework, and then in Dickeyville. And there's where she was when David got hurt, and they'd call her from there. All the rest of them were there to see him. Then we had the wake in the house, And that's what you did in those days. We were crowded, we put lots of chairs, and it was sad. But I'll always remember Joe Elskamp coming to me. One nice thing was told me. He said he was a gutsy kid, and he did always got be getting into things. And now he's up there where somebody else is watching him. It was a lovely thought. Then, because we were moving to Platteville, Mary and Rosen wanted to go, or their father wanted them to go, to a Catholic school in Dubuque instead of Platteville. So Shirley, their cousin of their own age, Sipker, Vernetta's daughter, was going to go to IC, so they went there too. And each worked in their different home, the two girls. For room and board, yeah. Mm-hmm. So when we moved to Platteville, it was a big farm, and we thought we could handle it when Vincent got drafted. So there was our big help, and we were sorry. And so we looked for a farm to buy in the meantime all the while. But I would not, when we'd be going out looking for a smaller farm, if it was over 3 miles or 4 miles, I would say turn around. I didn't want to live far out in the country because we had children going to school, and I didn't know that they had bus service like they did. And of course, we always moved March the 1st. And on this year, 1950?
51.
51, yes, that's right. All the relatives were helping, and Harry's brother Charlie had pickup load, and he had piled high of our bedroom furniture, and he neglected to tie the mattress on. That was on top. So sometime he lost it before he got in Platteville. And at Platteville, he had to ask at a filling station where this farm was. And so I don't remember seeing the farm either before we moved. And we didn't know where it was. But anyway, we got the furniture there and everything worked out okay. The first weekend when Rosen and Mary came home and I was showing the house, I thought it was so much better than the other one we lived in Tennyson. And Rosen was walking, I said, we got a bathroom and inside water. We were walking up the steps and upstairs, and Rosen saw the bathroom. She said, legs on the bathtub, and that didn't surprise her at all, but she wasn't thrilled at that anyway. So, and then we had, we all had to pitch in and help out in the summertime. And that one summer, making hay, Mary was helping up in the hay mow, and Vincent was gone to the service, and Carl was driving the horses. No, I guess he drove a little small tractor to pull up the hay into the hay mow. And Mary was helping me scatter the hay in the hay mow, and she looked out the window and she said, oh, I can see which is the best job. She thought that she should be out there on that little tractor and Carl be inside. That is it. After David died, we had 4 girls and 4 boys at that time, and so Harry wanted another boy. So luckily Mike was born December 7th, 1951, after we moved to Platteville. Vernetta told Rosalind and Mary, as they were going to school in Dubuque, they were seniors, and she said to them, isn't it nice your mom is having another baby? And it was due in December, and they were so surprised. Um, all my babies were born 10 months, we always did. So this time, I was going to go to the hospital the first time. So Vince took me in, um, and they said they'd help me start it. And bringing him home, the girls loved him, and they fussed over him and combing his hair. He had a lot of hair, and each one wanted to comb in a different way. He had a slight bout with eczema and allergies, but the doctor took care of it. Then we found a farm in the city limits, the Farmer Cunningham farm, about 90 acres or more in the city limits. And we moved there. Is it running? Then Rosen married Paul Hartung in 1954, and he was from Platteville. And we had a wedding at St. Mary's, and we had a big reception on the farm with a couple of tents. It was in July. And we had flies. And lots of neighbors and friends brought food and had a lot of food left. And when it was over, we noticed that I had left rugs by the doors. I shook them out and cleaned the floor, and I was going to put the rugs away, and I forgot all about it. And here people were walking over my rugs, and which I wanted to have put away. And even the governor was, Rennerbaum was invited because he owned the chain of stores where Paul worked in Madison. 2 years later, we had Harriet's reception on the farm, but we sprayed the area first, beforehand, for flies. She married a Richard Snyder, who she met as he was her substitute teacher when she was a senior. And he was from Galena, I see. They moved to Stockton, Illinois, where he had his first school. Then Mary got married in between there, between Rosen and Harriet's weddings. But this was in January of 55. And so in the wintertime, they got married in Platteville, Wisconsin, at a reception in Iowa, and a dance in Illinois that night. I had just had gallbladder surgery 2 months before, and Mary, I don't know how I want to say this, Mary married Joe Frederick as he farmed in Zwingle, Iowa, 40 miles away. I told Joe I'd be glad to have you marry Mary, but to live nearby so that she could give me permanence. After the 3 girls left home, Karen was left to do the housework when I was outside and this and that. And our hobbies were playing cards and visiting relatives each Sunday or inviting them up. And we were busy on the farm. I had chickens to take care of and milkers and gardening. And in the early years, Harry cut wood and brush in the woods, and he loved to pick blackberries or whatever. And I was lucky for Harry to take time to take me to Dubuque for shoes or a new permanent. And could buy boughten cookies for the kids. I learned to drive as a kid, but I had to ask Harry to take me to Dubuque. We watched the pennies. He was a worrywart, and the depression coming again. And like I say, if I told him I needed shoes or go to Dubuque, I would hide the new shoes in the closet for a while so he wouldn't be reminded of my spending money on that. He was worried about paying for the farm, but it was paid for ahead of time. We sold parts of it to the city before 1970 when he died. We had sold 30 acres to our neighbor Pearl Butson, and 8 acres to the high school. They needed a parking lot. That was $1,000 an acre. And then we sold some to the city park when we knew we were quitting farming. Like I'm reminded that we had a polio scare for a while, and nobody went away from the farms. They were really afraid of it.
In the summer.
In the summertime, yeah. And like I'm reminded, somebody's reminding me that each time when I was pregnant, you never went anywhere. You didn't even go to church. You just stayed home. But after that, when we are living on our farm there, Harry liked to play cards, and we had 8 neighbors in a card club. And we met in the evenings in our homes, and we sure enjoyed that. Made friends, lasting friends. And Vincent came home from Alaska in the service at the end of '54. He worked in Dubuque at Farley and Letcher. He met and married Marilyn Dean, May 1960. He worked at John Deere most of his life after that, retiring at age 55. Karen went to Madison after high school in Platteville, and she met Jim Lunsford and got married in '63. He was in the Air Force, and they moved to North Dakota and Davenport, and when he was discharged, they moved to San Diego because his mother and father lived out there. So then Carl, next in line, he started college in the start of the hippie days and decided to join the Navy about 1960. He left college, and for 4 years, when he came out of the Navy after 4 years, he graduated from Madison University as an electrical engineer. And he married Beth Brandt from Pea Ridge, Potosi in June '68. After years at Motorola near Chicago, he bought a 400-some acre farm near Cassville, and he seems content. Alan went to Platteville College for 2 years in the civil engineering, and he married Jan McPhail, April in '67. They had 2 sons, Craig and Eric, and he has been working at John Deere since February '72. He says he's an outdoor fanatic, fishing, hunting, and fishing. He bought a home in Platteville, and Jan works at Doctor's Park. Mike went 1 year after high school to be an ag mechanic at Fenimore. Then he decided to join the Navy, in the Navy from '71 to '75. Then he came back, and he went 1 year at Fenimore again, and he got a job as an auto parts mechanic until 1980. Well, Mike was in the Navy, and then he got a job as auto parts until 1980. Then he married Kim Mueller from Belmont in March in '78, and they live in Fenimore. They have
Now he works for the city.
And they have 2 girls, Sabrina and Natasha. Harry would never leave the farm to be gone over milking time. Nobody could milk the cows but him. But we did leave in 1969 to go out to California when he wasn't milking anymore. He'd sold the milk cows. So Mike was at home, and he could take care of the beef cattle. And we went out on train to San Diego, and On the way, it was announced that the train would stop for about 10 minutes at a certain place if you had to do something, mail something. And oh, right away Harry said, oh, I'll mail this card to Mike. I wanted to mail this to him, tell him he didn't have to open up those bales for those beef cattle outside. They could tear it into it themselves. So we sat in the train and watched him get off, and all of a sudden the train started up, and I wondered, did he get back on in time? He had the money in his pocket, he had the tickets in his pocket, I had nothing. But I made up my mind I was going to get a hold of some money after that. Another couple came up to their special car where we were sitting in, and they said, your husband got back into the seat all right, so I felt good about that. 2 years later, after Harry died, and we moved to town, to Platteville, Vernetta coaxed me to go out to California. The first one I flew out by myself, I guess, to see Karen. And then Vernetta coaxed me to go to Florida. And we went down to visit Joe and Beulah and some other friends. Going down the coast, I mentioned we stopped to see Sadie in Los Angeles, in San Diego, but she was in Los Angeles area. We went to San Diego, though, we went to San Diego to visit Karen, though. And at that time, around that time, Michael was out there in the Navy, so we got to see him too. If you ever ask Vernetta about it, she'll say what a big coward I was as we were going down the coast in that bus tour. We drove along 3 hours, I would call it the Big Sur, all along the ocean on one side and the big hill on the other side. And all the people in the bus went over and looked down at the ocean, and I went on the other side and looked up at the hills. I had a fear of going down there, so I was sad. Harry decided that we could retire in 1970, I guess it was, 1969. He had a buyer for the farm, so we sold real quickly, had a sale, and moved to town. He found a house advertised in the journal, and we moved to town. And in December, then he had a sale and sold the last of the things out in the farm. And then we were settled in town. And it was a real cold winter and lots of snow. And he was doing a lot of shoveling for neighbors that were in trouble and this and that. And I told him it was too much for him with his heart problem. He was not supposed to do that in cold weather especially. And he said, that's a good way to go. His brother Bill had told him that years ago, and his brother Bill did die suddenly. When his brother Bill died, he was in the 70s suddenly. So Harry was working on this tractor, or with a car, trying to get it started with a tractor here in town, and he couldn't get it started, and it was too much exertion, I guess, and there he had his heart attack. They rushed him by ambulance to the hospital, but it was too late. Suddenly. And one nice thing I can remember, somebody told me at the wake, a friend of mine said, Lillian, he'd have never been satisfied being retired. And that, I remember that all these years. I got along with the Children's Help, and I find their senior citizens and go there during the week and go on Sunday, play cards, and I made trips with the senior citizens, like a 2-day trip or a 1-day all around the country, which was very good, because I never made a trip before that until we went to California the first time. In a way, it was good living in town, I told everybody. It was so nice, no flies, mailbox was right on the side of the door, and the thermostat on the wall. So there were better things than they had out at the farm. Christmas on the farm got to be crowded, more crowded each year with the grandchildren, and we kept up this tradition until 1970 spot. As a grandchild graduated from high school, I made each of them a quilt that would be for a single bed or cover for our couch. And then, of course, I made three. And the second one in that same family just got a pillowcase. Until a few years ago, I had to give all of that up because my hands were too shaky. I couldn't thread a needle. I gave up the gardening 2 years ago, and I gave up the car when I was 80 years old. And I didn't miss that at all. There. My family started surprising me in '79 for my 70th birthday, and at the Timbers, which was a complete surprise. And ever since that, they call it a surprise now on my birthday. This last year, I was 85 now I was 85 in November. And between my daughters and in their parties, I had 3 parties, and Karen put it in the journal that it was my 85th birthday, they should send cards. So I got over 115 cards altogether. So my life is quiet, and it wouldn't be for 8 children, mostly, and then the grandchildren that are nearby to call, stop in, especially for Halloween parties and so forth. It's exciting enough. The only worry I have is my heart problem, which the doctor recommended putting patches on every other day, which will take care of the nitroglycerin tablets. I don't need them, so I feel pretty good. Of course, I don't do much either. Sitting around, talking on the phone, and friends taking me to a bazaar or church dinner don't take too much from me, but I enjoy it. A very sad thing happened in April in 1993. Craig, Alan's oldest boy, was killed in a car accident in Madison, which was such a shock. He was 25 years old, a lovable guy.
I can't think of any more to say.
That was a sad death. I don't want to witness any more. It sounds like my tape is done. Aren't you glad?